I came across this information while reading a book on economics that Europeans, when they first invaded the Native Americans and the Australian Aboriginals, brought along with them the diseases that nearly wiped out the original occupiers of the land by a mere handshake. I said that's utterly preposterous. I need to know the truth. And turns out, it is indeed true. Now, before I begin giving you the background and then the whole story, let's just first understand, what do you mean by a biological weapon? The poor man's atom bomb. Is it as hazardous as it sounds? Well, the World Health Organization defines this as either microorganisms like virus, bacteria, or fungi, or toxic substances produced by living organisms that are produced and released deliberately to cause disease and death in humans, animals, or plants. These pose a difficult public health challenge, causing more number of deaths in a short period of time. Because of this, and because such attacks can be easily mimicked as natural events, such weapons are deemed as unconventional weapons or weapons of mass destruction. Clearly, they are hazardous. Now story time. Let me take you back to the time when agricultural revolution wasn't even a thing. This is back when the Native Americans and Australian Aboriginals were living the time of their lives. Why do I put it like this? Because why did human beings start cultivating crops in the first place? It is because in places where the main source of food were animals, human hunters outgrew them in population. There were way too many mouths to feed and very few animals to hunt down. The same problem was with people who lived off of things that grew on trees. Man's need for food made him invent agriculture, and for the first time ever, he had a surplus of food. And with increasing surplus came the need for storage, and with that, it brought mice, flies, and even insects. Add non-existent sewage system to it, and voila, you have a growing population walking around with diseases. The Native Americans and the Australian Aboriginals do not have this problem, you see. They had food in abundance, so much so that they did not have to worry about cultivation or storage. Because they had an abundance of rich flora and fauna, some even discovered medicinal plants, which they used to cure diseases that they were aware of. So you see, when the Europeans decided to explore and then eventually invade these other continents, they brought along with them barrels of vomit and poo. Water that was stored for months and wasn't even clean when they first collected. And troops of men with transferable diseases, which they had been immune to because of the years of living in the conditions that I previously described. So when they landed on the grounds of the Australias and Americas, their mere handshake was enough to infect the Aboriginals and the natives, whose bodies were previously clueless about these new germs, and therefore not immune to them. It resulted in a massive demographic collapse, with 90% decline in the Native American population between 1492 and 1770, only due to virgin soil epidemics. Another 90% were wiped out in the Australian regions, once again due to previously unknown diseases. The Sydney Cove outbreak of 1789. These diseases were followed by measles, typhus, cholera, and even common cold, which had never existed in Australia before Europeans came along and started sneezing on things. Let's start with the Australian Aboriginal story of the Sydney Cove smallpox outbreak. Christopher Warren in his article showed that the Aboriginals' attempt to fight back increased with increased crop, fish, and sheep theft. There are also documented incidents of them molesting and even causing bodily harm, agonizing Admiral Phillip. Although Phillip obtained 10,000 musket balls at Rio de Janeiro, this amounted to only 50 balls per musket. And without cartridges, this quantity meant little. Phillip did ask for more ammunitions, but his letters did not receive any action. With fewer ammunitions and increasing turmoil, Phillip was left with fewer and weaker men than there were Aboriginals with weapons. His men were dying or becoming incapacitated. And so, Phillip picked up a cunning tactic, which apparently had become a military tactic by then, previously used on the Native American tribes by the British: the deployment of smallpox. What's worse, it was being advocated by the British generals and had become a standard procedure for when the troops were met by insufficiency of regular military resources. Similarly, in the Native Americans' land, since Christopher Columbus stepped foot on the land and incorrectly claimed to have discovered India, nearly 90% of the Native American population died of a mysterious disease, previously unknown to the tribes, but spared the Europeans living in the area. Research assumes it could have been plague, smallpox, influenza, or even yellow fever based off of the improperly documented symptoms. But the 1763 incident is the most talked about, as it could have been the first ever documented biological warfare. Could it not be contrived to send the smallpox among those disaffected tribes of Indians? I shall try and inoculate them with some blankets, and take care not to get the disease myself, as it is a pity to expose good men against them. I wish we could use the Spanish method to hunt them with English dogs who would, I think, effectively extirpate or remove that vermin. You will do well to try to inoculate the Indians by means of blankets, as well as to try every other method that can serve to extirpate this inexorable race. Is this a tactic from the past alien to the world we know today? Perhaps not. Germans infected horses and cattle with anthrax before sending them off to Europe during the First World War. The United States seemed to have invested in the research and development of biological weapons during the Second World War. The Soviet biological weapons program is not unknown, and although the tripartite agreement was signed, and although 162 countries have signed a similar document, there is no way to assess or verify the compliance of these agreements. Moreover, frozen samples of smallpox are still being maintained by the governments of certain countries. If an unwanted presence gets hold of any of these remaining samples, an act of disastrous terrorism could succumb the world. Makes one wonder of all the epidemic breakouts one has encountered over the years, and thus all the WhatsApp forwards, the conspiracy theories, and the mothers going anti-vaccination, and don't forget the hate towards the rich top 1%. Bioweapons. Is it real, or is it all just an elaborate hoax? You decide.